In that case, then, I call the Honourable Dr. Rajin Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure taking a call on this bill, particularly because I did have the role of Human Rights Commissioner for 5 years and have lived through the previous manifestations of some of the things that are coming through here. But first, Mr. Speaker, it's important to say that this side of the House is not averse to improving human rights legislation. And for that reason alone, we will support this to Select Committee, because it is inevitable that there will be occasions when the environment has changed so much that an act as important as this needs to be modernised. And if that's what this is trying to do, then there is every reason why we should support it. However, Mr. Speaker, I would say this. In the area of human rights, it is important for Parliament to reach consensus, because our human rights are the rights we have by virtue of being human. And there ought to be no dispute, no difference amongst the various sides of this House to the instrument we develop to promote those rights for our citizens. And so we will work very hard in Select Committee to achieve that consensus. But fair warning is served by the Greens and also by us, that we will want certain changes to this bill before it comes back in a form where we will support it. And we will debate those matters at length, Mr. Speaker, during the Select Committee process. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, that this bill recommends changes to the structure of the Commission. And again, there is no strong views that I have as to whether or not the structure proposed is a better one. But it's certainly worth experimenting with. However, what is to be reflected on, Mr. Speaker, is that the structure that is recommended in this bill is the old structure. The structure that was changed in 2000 by the amendment bill, because the arguments made then was the exact opposite of the arguments being made here. The arguments were that the number of commissioners we didn't have enough, we wanted to reduce them to our governance role, and therefore part-time commissioners would be much better. And that was part of the argument the consultants made to give us the very structure that is now being changed. And what is being recommended here is to go back to the old structure. Well, if that is the experience of the Human Rights Commission, Mr. Speaker, then we should follow it. And we want to hear the arguments in Select Committee. But the regulatory impact statement, however, makes a very interesting argument. It says the present way of appointing commissioners actually is inflexible. And in fact, this compromises the minister to some extent. Well, I will need some convincing that that is to be so. I mean, the regulatory impact statement actually says that by the minister herself in this case, determining who is to be the designated commissioners actually does not enable flexibility within the Commission. It actually compromises the role of the minister. Well, it doesn't. I refuse to see that. However, this is an argument the Ministry of Justice has pursued for a long time. It has not liked the independent commissioners. And in the 2000 reforms, the only bit of my recommendation was followed by the then government was to retain the specialist commissioners, and they have served as well. So part-time commissioners change, we'll see. Let's hear the arguments, let's hear what's proposed, and if this is a better governance structure, then we'd have no difficulties with that particular one. But there is another issue here, Mr. Speaker. The explanatory note to the bill says this, and I read, a full-time position of Disability Rights Commissioner within the Commission will be established. The bill does no such thing. It actually doesn't do that. So why is the explanatory note actually saying that that's what the bill does? The bill actually establishes no specialist commissioners. What it does, it establishes generic commissioners to be given designated roles, but they will not be called those roles. They will simply have a generic responsibility. Now, that's where we begin to dig into the reasons behind some of the changes being proposed here. And we do not support just generic commissioners. We support the specialist commissioners, because in every case, those specialist commissioners have been very, very effective. incredibly effective. Look at the work of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commissioner. She was one of the most successful commissioners we've had, the previous one. She's so successful. So why are we doing away with that? Because the sector that advocates that particular area actually, in a sense, identified with that role and had an ownership with it. The same can be said of racial relations people. At a time when New Zealand society is diversifying to the extent that it is, and there is so much identification amongst the diverse communities with that particular role, this government is trying to do away with that role. Why? For no reason. And the Disability Rights Commissioner is the same. That role must be retained, and I agree with the Greens. So we'll argue for that in this committee. Now, we wonder, Mr. Speaker, why is it the government's doing this? Because the real issue in this commission is not the specialist commissioners. The real issue is the inability of the Chief Commissioner to actually manage this commission in such a way that it all works well. So there is a governance problem, the problem of the role of the Chief Commissioner, that is being addressed in one of the most dramatic ways possible by doing away with the very roles in the Commission that are the most effective. I would rather the Select Committee retussled with how to underscore the responsibility of the Chief Commissioner. I would like to see that role strengthened, if that is the real issue. So we'll be asking the Select Committee why the changes, what is it expected to achieve, and if we can be convinced, then we want the official to rewrite this piece so that that role is strengthened, the role of the Chief Commissioner. That does have an implication for the Minister to appoint Chief Commissioners who have a human rights background. And in order for us to have a commission to operate in the way in which these recommendations seek, then indeed that particular role has to be changed appropriately. So there is a lot here, Mr. Speaker, that is below the surface. As typical Ministry of Justice, they have proposed a structural change, they have written their regulatory impact statements, and in fact there still is much more to be thought through and done in order to keep those things in this commission that are good, which are the specialist commissioners. We have no objection to the number of part-time, full-time commissioners, that's fine. But then the role of the Chief Commissioner, let's face that head on and say, why do we need to strengthen that? If so, what's the best way of doing it? But we don't want the baby to be thrown out with the bathwater, because if we did that, we'd lose the very things that are important to us. So with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I bring my speech to an end. Thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair. The People's House is suspended, and I will resume the chair at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ka kite anō, po marui, good evening.